Hello Twinmotion users, we are in video number 2 of a series, and we're going to start looking at some of the functions of Twinmotion. So we've got this scene, we've imported this from another 3D modeling program, and we're going to just jump in and do a couple things in here. And we're just going to show some of the quirks and the fun things built in Twinmotion. And we can see in my 3D model, we've got a couple issues here, but I'm not too worried about them. I'm not going to be looking at the back of this house, so I'm not too worried. But I could import just this section from my model just to repair just this section. And it's easy enough to do. All you would do is go into your file, import this same item, and replace it, essentially. So this actually looks like it's coming from, yeah, it's coming from that terrain model. So in the previous video, I explained how we want to have different overlaid materials, if you will, or terrain features, if you will, so that it would help us in Twinmotion not have bleed through in some of the geometry that's available to us in Twinmotion. So the first thing I'm going to do, and if you've ever opened up Twinmotion and played around or watched some other videos, I'm sure videos explain this guy right here, this tab right here, which is we've got our various tools available to us: our paths tool, vegetation paint, and our vegetation scatter, and our urban. So vegetation scatter, vegetation paint are what we're going to be looking at in this video. So let's take a look at vegetation scatter. Now I click that icon and immediately I get this sidebar pull up. And if you're unfamiliar with the layout of Twinmotion, that can be brought up at any time by clicking this right caret in the top corner. And I don't have enough hours in this software to know why I can't just pin this open all the time, because that would be my preference. Oh, hey, we just figured it out right there. Let's hit our what we used to call a hamburger icon, the dot, 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 and then I can hit this lock button right here. And that should, let's see, if it's enabled, Twinmotion, you guys should really work on your graphics here. If it's enabled, it looks like it's going to be highlighted. That's right. So that if let's see if I get off of this and go hit my vegetation again. Yeah, it still stays up there. So I like that. I like this just pinned on. So there we go. So carrying on, we're in our glass and flowers section. Now, if I go down or up a level, which is, very Windows Explorer S, this might be different on a Mac. I can go back to the root hierarchy of how Twinmotion organizes its assets. So let's get back into vegetation and landscape, which is where our various grasses live. And let's go into our grass and flowers. And I'm just going to pick lawn 1 because that's the height of the lawn that I would like for this side yard. So what I'm going to do here is, you could take this and drag it into the model and see what happens. And what it's going to do is it's going to show you the instance. This is actually the geometry that it's going to be placing multiple times by using the scatter tool or the paintbrush tool. It's going to place this geometry. Now, the reason that this is important, we'll see in just a minute here. Let's just delete that. I'm going to grab this lawn item. Oops, I need to get back into my vegetation scatter mode, context vegetation scatter. Let's see if we can get to that in a different way. It doesn't seem like we can. So context vegetation scatter, and then let me grab that lawn 1 and I'm going to drop it in just as it's explaining for me to do. And now when I select it, a couple things happen. One is these tools all of a sudden are available to me, and also the settings tool. Now let's just dive in and take a look at what it does. If I use this plus icon, which looks like a paint bucket tool, you can see it immediately produces some geometry. And this is what we're talking about. When I wanted to take a look at that geometry placed as an individual item, you could see that it's a little bit big for geometry. And so what happens is this is going to place about its center up to the bounds of the container you are placing it on. You can see here in our scene graph, here's our scatter vegetation, but it is also being applied to a particular terrain model, this portion of the terrain right there. So it places these models based on the center access of that particular Lawn 01 model. And so what happens is we get this spillover along the line here. So this particular tool is built more for putting grass on very, very large sections, right? And so what I'm going to do is, and I could go through and use the eraser tool, and you can see just by default, this is built for a very large model. The diameter is 10 meters. I'm going to change this. I'm going to make it down to like 0.5 meters. And you can see all of a sudden my bubble has shrunken down considerably. And what you notice here is I really have to get close to the geometry for it to disappear. That's because we are erasing that full model section, right? So if I grab this and I just place it, that's what we're erasing. This is the center mark of this. It's placing it by the bound so that if this is the boundary, you can see we're going to get some spillover. So Lawn 01 is not that great for applying it to items like this. So I'm going to click and select this. I might have to click a couple times to find that geometry. Same thing here. Oh, there we go. We got it right away. So another thing we might take a look at is our detail grasses, our lawn borders. Now, I know it looks like what it's doing here is placing some kind of pattern around pavers, but it's just showing you that this particular lawn is built to be used on borders. You see, if we place it here, this is our model. That's it, this tiny little guy. So we can get a lot closer to borders and not have it spill over, which kind of alludes to the next part of this video, which is that we're going to stay away from that scatter, and maybe we'll use it to populate some of the larger grass areas. But when we have boundaries, we're going to end up using these lawn border tools. So that brings us back to our context menu where we're in the vegetation paint. And this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be painting this area. Now, automatically it brings up trees. You have to go, up in the hierarchy to get back to grass and flowers and detail grasses. And if I wanted to just paint this guy, all I'd have to do is drag him into drop model here to start painting on surface. Come on, get in there. What's going on? Well, it's not working. So what that tells you is that it doesn't work with the vegetation paint tool, which brings us back full circle to our vegetation scatter tool. So there we go. We're going to go up a level in grass and flowers. We're going to get to detail grasses. We're going to go to lawn borders, and we're going to drop this in, and we will start painting with it. And I'm going to click this a bunch of times actually, because I'm going to end up, producing this same effect several times. And then once I do, I'm going to go back in here. If I click on this item here, I had to click outside of the item, inside of this open area here, and then back on this item to enable settings. You'll notice that over time. So here's my next part is I can change the size from here. I can kind of get a variation in my lawn, whether or not I wanted a mowed lawn or kind of a random lawn. There you go. That's where we can edit that. Dryness, we can tint it. We can put, lawnmower stripes in it. That's all nice and fine. We can keep continuing this plus and add button. We can also drag in here another layer of this grass. We can bring it in here like 4 or 5 times if we wanted to, and select all these guys and hit the plus button. And we start getting to fill this in pretty quick, but not quite the way I want to see it done. Look at that. Please wait, work in progress. Then we can take just certain sections of this. Let's click off and back on again. Oh, let's do it one more time. Just grab these last two. And it should be that I just increasing or decreasing certain parts of this lawn so that I can get, a real varying effect here. The last part of this and the biggest part of what we did in video 1 is that I designated this space to be lawn ahead of time. I planned this to be lawn, and what that helps me do is if I jump back into the hierarchy to my root and get into materials, there's a section called ground and nature. And in nature we have various different grasses that they've built in Twinmotion so that I can drag this guy underneath my grass, and now my grass looks pretty dang good. I can get back in and select these guys, all three of these, or all four of these guys. And I can, you know, put those, the striping in there. You might want to edit the striping. You can see the scale of that. Maybe we'll take this size down to 1, and we're going to end up, oh, I like my lawnmower lines going left to right. There we go. So really quickly, we've got a very good looking grass texture out here. While we're in our materials section here, our context here, I'm going to go ahead and get, let's see, we were in our materials. There we go. Back into ground, back into nature, and I'm going to do a couple things. One is, I think that this is either, I don't know, a cobblestone or a gravel or pebbles. You can see how quickly you can change this. Same thing with the asphalt. I'm going to go up a level and go to man-made, and we've got asphalt 1, asphalt 2, asphalt 4, that pink asphalt. I like asphalt 4, that works. Concrete road. Yeah, we could do that on the curb if we wanted to. We could even, you know, get these like divided lines there and the sidewalk. And my driveway, we might do, I don't know, something darker to kind of set it apart as a man-made driveway. Something like that. Who knows? So there we go. So the next part is we'll just touch on a couple of these other things. Let's see. I want to get a nice realistic dirt texture in this this section right here where the plants are. Maybe another dirt right here. You can see where it came in handy to have pre-set up our areas for what they were going to be. So we can get some different textures in here underlaid underneath what we're going to do with our 3D geometries. So we've already got a pretty good start here. Yeah, it's looking good. So next thing is we'll get into this little area here, which is grass as well. And I'm going to use this grassy ground texture because I want to kind of pull that grass away from my tree that I'm going to end up replacing because it looks like garbage. I was about to say a bad word. So let's get back into our context, get into, we've got our vegetation paint, we've got our vegetation scatter. This time around, I'm going to use the vegetation paint tool just to show its capabilities. And before I even really get into it, and I'm going to be painting grass on here, lawn, something like this. Actually, we might do the larger lawn this time around. Let's do long grass 3. Now I could just paint all willy-nilly, you know, and try to get this to look correct, but you see what's happening is I'm painting all over the place. It's not exactly the effect that I want to do. So first thing is I'm going to escape out of this paint tool, and I haven't found a great way to do that except for hitting a bunch of buttons like escape and space bar. But now I've got this terrain selected. You can see it's the terrain selected in my hierarchy on the right side of my scene graph. Right off the bat, I might just rename this right off the bat, and this is going to help me just keep track of these kind of things, because this is going to be front yard, right? So I'm going to name it front yard because that's going to help me file it away a little bit later. So front yard, and I don't know, let's just call it round section. That's going to be really easy for me to find down the road, especially when I go back. And a couple things you can do here. You can collapse all hierarchy, and you can also sort alphabetically. And immediately what that will do is in my terrain, you can see I'm going to get that front lawn area right there. Boom. And over time, as I go through this, if I wanted to keep the Festuca plants in here, I'll end up just clicking on my terrain container. We can set this as the active container. That means that any new container is going to fall under the active container. If I were just to do new container right there, it would go under the scene graph. I want this folder to go under terrain, and I'm going to name this Festuca. Bam. I can go back to the top of my hierarchy. I can sort this by name again, sort alphabetically, and now when I get down to Festuca, there we go. So it's going to be really easy for me to go through and select all these guys, which there are a ton of them, and drop them into a folder. So just touching on that whole folder hierarchy thing again. And then when we collapse it, we've just got less stuff to scroll through to get to my front yard round section. So now let me select that front yard round section, and the thing I'm going to do in the scene graph is I'm going to right click and I'm going to isolate this selection. And what that does is now I can use my context menu with my vegetation paint, with my long grass, and paint just to the borders of this guy. Look at that. Isn't that freaking beautiful? Now something you'll notice, I'm going to just undo that guy real quick. Something you'll notice with this paint tool, oops, and let's get back to this vegetation paint tool, is that if I increase the diameter back up to, let's go, I don't know, 2 here, you're going to see, look at the spillover. What that tells you is that the diameter actually matters when it comes to the accuracy of our paint tool. So let's undo that. Again, I don't know a quick way to get back to this context menu without clicking a bunch of buttons, but let's go back and retroactively see if we can get that lawn 1 to really bind to the edges here. Same practice here. We paint with our 2.3 meter paintbrush and it spills all over the place. I'm going to hit Control Z to get out of that, and it's going to force me to go find this again. Here we go. So let's grab this, hit that paintbrush tool again, and let's drop this down to 0.5 meters, and let's see if it will cut to the bounds. And it does. Look at that. Beautiful. So something to note here, you can see we've got long grass. We've also got lawn 01 in here. We've got long grass and lawn 01 painting together. That's because anything you drop in here will paint together. So not only am I painting grass now, but I'll be painting trees as well. So that's something very important to note. Let's hit Control Z, get rid of that guy. Let's get rid of this. And let's just delete this guy. Oh, and you know what's going to happen? Look at that. Oh, what a shame. So this is a great thing to keep note of. Twinmotion, in my opinion, is very unstable. And what's terrible about this is we lost all my folder hierarchy. So we're going to get it back and start this video again in just a minute. Okay, so we have recovered from not 1, but 2 crashes. This is the 3rd iteration of trying to paint this particular area. So if you're not careful, Twinmotion will crash on you. Save often. So this is video number 2. We're partway through the video and we've covered how to paint this section over here, and that's something that we lost in one of these crashes. I'll have to do it again. But now we're just kind of going over the other various tools, and particularly the isolation tool. So if I open up my hierarchy over here, my scene graph, and then I go down to isolate, I can isolate just this section here. And where we left off was that we could change the brush size in the context menu of the vegetation paint down to like 0.5 meters. And what that would do was it made it us capable of cutting a very fine line against the borders here. So that if I grab this long grass and drop it into my tool and paint along this edge, I get a nice little fine edge along this isolated selection, which is really great for kind of filling in the borders. Now, I'm not particularly fond of this grass because of just how tall it is. So I might go through and do what we did in the previous section, which is use that that edge grass and then just do the fill tool or what's that contextual menu? I'm not exactly sure, but I've got this painted now. I want to select this item again and increase my density so this really fills out. And then all I have to do is go anywhere. I can click on any item over here and click that isolate or exit isolate tool. There we go. So now that grass is painted. It's a little larger than I want it to be. Let me see if I can actually skim that down. I had to click a couple times to be able to select that. What I would typically do is I would grab the selection underneath this, which is this section right here. We're going to rename it like we did in the previous video. Front porch, what did we call it? Round section, something like that. Front porch round section. And something I can do is I can start a new, I didn't go through and fix my scene graph since the last crash, but let's just do a new container, and this is going, well, let's just name it the same thing, front porch round section. And the point of this is that I'm going to take this painted vegetation right here, and I'm going to drop it into this section. I'm also going to take that front porch round section, if I can click past the painted vegetation, or I might need to go find it. This is where having your hierarchy is really important, because it would be very simple for me to locate that front porch round section right here and then group it into that same folder. So anyways, there we go, front porch round section, and this would all be underneath a subfolder called terrain. So a really easy way to organize these particular elements, especially for troubleshooting if you're finding that, you know, something's overlapping on another model. So I can select this again, this painted vegetation. I could select it just by selecting it in 3D, or I could go into the hierarchy, find it, and select that painted vegetation. And then I can hit my erase tool and kind of, you know, I can really just wipe this stuff out as I want to, and then do that isolate section again, and maybe kind of detail this out. But since we've got this open, I'm going to go into the settings and see if we can't scale this down. And this is what I discovered last time, and it actually crashed the program a couple times. For whatever reason, this particular vegetation will not scale down, which is why I don't really like it, because that grass is just too tall. The other part of this is I want to get kind of a really finite look here, where in my vegetation paint, and let's get back down, painted vegetation, I want to have a very realistic thing happening here, where the grass is kind of pulled away from the mound of dirt that's going to, you know, be around this tree. So all I did there is hit that eraser tool, the vegetation eraser, and kind of erase around that tree. But as you can see, it doesn't do exactly what I want it to do. So we're going to come up with a way of getting around that, because here we go, we want to erase that section too. So here we are in the front porch section, and we're going to do a couple of new things. We're going to get into our contextual menu, get into our vegetation scatter. We're going to do something similar to the first go around, but with a few added things here and there. So first thing is I'm going to drop the lawn in here, because I want a little bit of fill from the lawn. I'm also going to grab that detail grass, and one more thing here. We're going to do the long grass. Oh, maybe we'll do this long grass right here. And I'm going to select two of these. These are both in my vegetation scatter tool right now. If I had all three, or if I just had them all deselected, obviously the toolbar goes gray. As soon as I select a couple items, it gives me that option. So I'm going to grab this. I'm going to pump this up a couple times. You see we've got some spillover. I'm not too worried about it at the moment. I'm going to click this button a bunch of times, and that's going to let this fill in and let it kind of iron out its, as we said before, its collision detection, and fill this in as needed. The last part of this is I'm going to grab this long grass and put that in, and you see just how much it fills in. It's quite extensive actually. Now I'm going to click in the gray area, click back on that long grass. I'm going to get into the settings of this, and I'm going to kind of dumb down some of the size of this here. There we go. And I might even come back in here and subtract some of this, and that doesn't seem to do what you would think it does. So someone might need to explain that to me. So it doesn't seem to thin out this long grass, and that's okay. The next part of this is I'm going to take the eraser tool, and we're going to watch as this program seems to be either catching up or crashing again. Okay, there we go. Seems to be working very slowly. So I'm going to switch this diameter down to something that I can control and get really tight here. And I'm gonna erase along the border's edge to kind of get rid of this spillover. There we go. Got some of that gone. And again, just to better understand this, you need to understand how Twinmotion is doing, is painting this vegetation. It's based on a base model that it repeats and collides with each other, and then reorients, rescales until it fits just right. And so to understand that, you need to understand where you need to place this eraser tool to be able to catch those edges, which is you need to bring this eraser tool far enough in from the edge to catch the geometry of the thing that you're trying to erase. So there we go. We've got a pretty good looking section. I'm going to undo the isolate here. And then I can come in here and use that eraser tool again and get in right around this item right here. Now, granted, we've got the long grass selected, so it's only erasing long grass. So I'm going to set it up so that it erases the borders and the long grass, and let's see where that ends up. Yeah, so now we got like a little bit of grass around there. We're going to delete some here. There we go. We've removed a little bit of grass there as well. So that's all looking pretty good. Let's just do this section again. It's almost like a repeat process so that you guys understand the process. So here we go. We're going to get into our materials. We're going to get into our nature materials. I'm going to put a grass here as an underlay. Just drag it on. I want something that doesn't look like it's repeating too much. That looks pretty good. And then I'm going to get back into our contextual menu. And if I hit scatter, you can see it goes back to that particular version of the scatter tool. And I feel like I have to click on a different geometry to be able to get it to do what I want it to do, which is reset. And so now we'll get back to our detail grasses, and I'm just going to fill this in with our border grass. I'll grab this. In fact, I don't know, maybe I'll bring it in here a couple times and get some different settings on this and just start clicking away until this fills in. And then if I click off those tools, get into settings, and we can get some, some dry sections there, a little bit different than the last time we did it. Kind of an unkempt yard here, or we can pump that size way up, anything in between. And keep in mind, you can kind of overlay these features on top of each other. We can get the stripes in here if we wanted to, kind of get that lawnmower thing going on. Let's just change that to 1, change this to 90. And get a really good looking yard over there on the side yard. We've got kind of a rough looking yard right here. Great way to look at these tools and get started in your vegetation. Now you can see here something I did wrong. I didn't clip my terrain around those stones, and this is exactly what we're talking about in video 1. So we need to get back to our vegetation scatter and use our erase tool, and then we just need to erase around these stones, clear them up. So next video we're going to look at the tree models and take a look at when you want to use Twinmotion trees versus when you should try importing a high poly count tree or a very detailed looking tree. So stay tuned for the next video, and as usual, subscribe.